أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers, my dear respected sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran in chapter 33 verse 41, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu udhkuru Allah dhikran kathira. O you who believe, remember Allah with a frequent remembrance. Now when we look at this verse in the Holy Quran, and we think back to the individual who received this verse in all of its verses, the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came upon whom? The best of God's creation, His most beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih. I think our beloved Prophet Muhammad deserves a better salawat than that. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, and in the next few nights, what I would like to do in this brief reflection with you all, my dear brothers and sisters, is go back to the days that existed and created the foregrounds for our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alih, even before his birth. There were individuals that created the groundwork for our Prophet. Now when you hear us speaking in these nights, reflecting in these nights, there's an emphasis on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's an emphasis on the Prophet and his household. But I want to ask you, what household did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alih come from? Before his household that he created, that he was the master of, before Al Muhammad, the ones who were a house from him, which house did he come from? Who was his mother? Who was his father? Who was his grandfather? Who were his uncles? Tonight, in this verse, chapter 33, verse 41, I want you to remember this verse with an individual who protected the Kaaba. Remember this place, the Kaaba, whom the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alih, he grew up his life in Mecca. And when he proclaimed his message, after so many years of persecution, the Holy Prophet would leave Mecca and go to a land called Yathrib. This land called Yathrib would become known as Medina. And Medina would become his new home. But the Holy Prophet would finally return to the Kaaba in 630 AD, and he would free the Kaaba from the polytheists, from the pagans of Quraysh. But this Kaaba was protected by a man named Abdul Muttalib, who protected the Kaaba and protected the believers even before the Prophet was born. Now tonight I want you to remember this verse, اذكروا الله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا. I want you to remember Abdul Muttalib, because this was a man, the grandfather of Rasulullah, who lived in the 6th century. This man manifested this verse in every ounce of his existence, even when all of the odds were against him. I'm going to share a couple stories with you tonight. Sound good? Who here wants to learn about Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of Rasulullah? Hands up, come on, hands up. Abdul Muttalib, a legend like no other. Abdul Muttalib, remember him tonight. Verse 33, 41, remember Abdul Muttalib. Udhkurullaha dhikran kathira, one who remembers Allah with a frequent remembrance. There was a drought that struck Arabia. A drought struck Arabia like never before. And the people were getting desperate. Remember, at this time, Arabia was filled with pagans, with polytheists. There were some believers, Abdul Muttalib being one of them. Him and his family were individuals that were muwahhideen. They were individuals who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the millah of Ibrahim, on the path of Ibrahim, our Prophet Abraham alayhi salam. All of the people of Arabia, the people of Mecca specifically, they were becoming desperate. They were praying to their idols and no rain was coming. So they finally turned to a man that they knew that when this man prays, his prayers are answered. So they turned to Abdul Muttalib and they asked him, "Oh Abdul Muttalib, can you pray to your Lord to bring forth the rain?" So Abdul Muttalib smiles, he obliges, and he goes into the desert, under the desert sky, under the open sky. And Abdul Muttalib begins to whisper a prayer. He says, "Ya Allah, these are your people. These are your creation, your servants, and the sons and daughters of your servants. Rid us of this drought and bring forth the rain, Ya Allah." The people waited. Abdul Muttalib repeated his prayer. Repeated it again and again and again. And then they felt it. A drop. 2. 3. And before they knew it, the people were feeling the rain from the heavens showering upon them. And it was the prayer of Abdul Muttalib that took these people from near death, starvation, thirst, to rain, soaking the desert sand. So the people were dancing in the rain, frolicking, joyful. And Abdul Muttalib was washing his face with the droplets of the rain that came from his prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this wasn't the only miraculous feat that Abdul Muttalib had. In the year 570 AD, which is a significant year, if you guys want to remember that, put it as a note, 570 AD. It was known as the year of the elephant. And it would be the year that the greatest of God's creation would be born. But more to come on that. In the year 570 AD, there was a man by the name of Abraha. Abraha was a general from the Aksum kingdom. It was a kingdom in Abyssinia. Abyssinia would be in Eastern Africa today. Ethiopia, Eastern Sudan, and even part of southern Yemen belonged to this kingdom. And this general decided to launch his own kingdom and have his own people. What he wanted to do was he had this vision of creating the most grand cathedral to be the place of pilgrimage for all of the people of the region, all of Arabia. He was a Christian. And he had this vision that he wanted all of the people of Arabia to come and worship at his grand cathedral. But he had a problem. He built the cathedral, people were going to it, but not everyone. The problem was the Kaaba. The Kaaba existed to the north. And the people of Quraysh, the people of Mecca, and many of the Arabians went to the Kaaba to perform their own pilgrimages. Again, this was before the days of Islam. So Abraha decides, I am going to make sure that everyone comes to my grand cathedral, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy the Kaaba. Who here has heard of the surah in the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Fil, chapter on the elephant? This is the story. So what happens was Abraha decides, I'm going to launch a campaign a war on the Kaaba. I'm going to destroy the Kaaba. When the people of Mecca saw the army of Abraha come, thousands in infantry, cavalry, and tank-like elephants. Literally, he brought elephants from East Africa to Arabia. This man was resolute on destroying the Kaaba because he didn't want any more competition. What happens? The people of Mecca run for the hills. They're like, we don't want anything to do with this. This guy means business. He wants to destroy the Kaaba, let him have it. So the people of Mecca run for the hills. And literally no one stays in the city of Mecca except one man. One man. One man with vision. One man with faith. One man with a conviction like no other. One man who didn't need anyone next to him because his friend was Allah. Because his backbone was Allah. Because his faith and his conviction was in the one that you could not see. But he filled his heart. That one man was Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib stayed defending the Kaaba against literally, I want you to imagine this, thousands of cavalry, infantry, and elephants. They looked at him and they saw this one man standing yards in front of the Kaaba, not moving. They looked at him and they started laughing. They said, what are you going to do? Why don't you run for the hills like the rest of the people? What do you think you're going to do here? He said, this house has a Lord who protects it. They all continued to mock him and laugh. And Abdul Muttalib turned again. وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ ذِكْرًا كَثِيرًا. Frequent remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He turns to Allah again and he whispers a prayer. He says, Ya Allah, this is your house. Protect it. Protect it. Before you know it, the elephants, the cavalry, the infantry, they wanted to move, but they couldn't. In fact, history tells us that these elephants that were so massive, those men that were riding them and moving them were whipping them to move and finally go forward and demolish the Kaaba. They couldn't. They stopped. And then they noticed above them, suddenly the sky was dark. Remember, this is Arabia. This is the desert. We don't get storms all of a sudden. It wasn't clouds. The sun was blocked out by thousands of birds that came from the heavens carrying pebbles. Now, all of these massive elephants suddenly were no match for Abdul Muttalib, because Abdul Muttalib was aided by an army of birds from heavens that dropped these pebbles and destroyed this entire army. And Abraha and all he wanted to do and everything that he had in his mission to destroy the Kaaba, all of a sudden, with the prayer of one man, came to a complete halt. Now you and I, we're looking back at the story, whether it be Abdul Muttalib and having his prayer answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save his people from a drought, or it be to save the Kaaba itself. It was a prayer of a man, a prayer of one man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran to remember him with a frequent remembrance. I guarantee you, brothers and sisters, not because of myself, I'm nobody. But whether it be a day, a week, a month that you're experiencing a certain low, whatever challenge you're going through, you fill in the blanks for yourself. Each of us goes through our own unique challenges, our own unique struggles. And it's not, by the way, where you were in a dark place and now you have enlightenment and you're never going back. life hits us from ways and directions that we may never see coming. And you may look at sometimes some people and be like, I would never do that. And then a few years later, you find yourself in that struggle that you said, I would never do that. I would never be there. I can't understand why people would do that. I can't understand how people do these things. It's when we remove ourselves from that remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and suddenly, without realizing it, it's us depending on our own selves, on our own confidence, on our own capabilities, on our own experience, on our own skills, on our own traits, on our own qualities, and say, I'm the man. I'm the person who's going to take care of it. I'm the person to do it. I'm the person to make it happen. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humbles us. And we realize the prayers of Abdul Muttalib didn't come from, oh Allah, I am your righteous servant. Oh Allah, these are your people. It wasn't, oh Allah, give me because you know I worship you day and night. It was, oh Allah, you have your people here. This is your house. These are your people. This is your creation. Let me just be a means of communication, a means of prayer, a means of asking so that your mercy and your grace may be manifested so beautifully, because all of it belongs to you. All of the victory, all of the praise, all of the greatness belongs to you and nobody else. See, you and I, brothers and sisters, when we realize what our role is in our lives, when you and I realize that we belong to something, the literal life that we live, the literal day that we have means more than you and I as an individual. When I'm speaking up here as Jalal, it shouldn't be about Jalal. When you are living your day, can you live your day beyond and more than your own individual and personal seeking and pursuit? When you belong to that, and you are in that frequent remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, udhkurullaha dhikran kathira. That frequent remembrance, you change your entire existence into something that's greater than yourself. And then you can become that vessel, you can become that vehicle. Then you can be that individual that does what? That does what? That is truly worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In these nights, my dear brothers and sisters, I want us to think more than our own individual pursuits and needs. Can you attach yourself to your heritage, your spiritual heritage? The history of Abdul Muttalib, the history of Abu Talib, the history of Amina, the history of Fatima bint Asad, the history of Abdullah, the history of Lady Khadija alayha salam, the history of these individuals that played such a huge part. And I mentioned all of these individuals who we're going to cover in the following nights, inshallah. Tonight, only a couple stories on Abdul Muttalib, but there's so much more. The history of these individuals, because why? When you are looking at these individuals' history, you realize what you belong to. Who here is from Dearborn, Michigan? You know what? Dearborn Heights at Fao Idaikon too. It's okay. We're all one community. Dearborn Heights. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Beautiful. Okay. Anyone not from Dearborn Heights? Anyone? Where are you guys from? Detroit? Beautiful. Hajj, where are you from? Okay, that's a good one. All right, well, so Northville now. Okay. We'll take it. Wherever you are from, I want you to take something with you tonight. You belong, listen carefully. Listen, you don't want to miss this. You belong to a history and a heritage that's greater than anything else. When you attach yourself to the history and the heritage, the spiritual heritage, the spiritual history of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, you have something that nobody else has. You belong to something that nobody else belongs to. So I want you in these nights, as you're examining the verses from the Holy Quran, look at the history behind those verses so that you can see where you come from. Anybody asked you before, hey, where are you from? Anybody ask you where you from? Or where you from? This is where we're from. All together. This is where we're from. This is where we're from. Cool? All right. We'll end with that, my dear brothers and sisters, inshallah. And we'll stay in this reflection of making the verses of the Holy Quran, along with our history, a living movement for ourselves, so that we feel this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who gives us the energy, the motion, the passion, and the movement for our own personal and collective betterment, inshallah. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.